It's a sunny afternoon on June 1st, 1936, on the New York Harbor waterfront. A police officer named Gene stands in front of a barricaded area, facing a large crowd. Gene is protecting a private marina, one of the best views of the harbor, and any moment now, a highly anticipated sight is due to arrive, the world's newest and most luxurious ocean liner, RMS Queen Mary. But the crowd is trying to get past Gene and onto private property for a better look. A balding man is at the front, mere inches from Gene's face. He tries to reason with him. Look, this area is off limits. You need to go somewhere else. There is nowhere else. Everywhere's full. We just need a place to stand and watch. No, you all need to move back. These people just want to witness a piece of history, officer. We're not going to hurt nothing. The Queen Mary is a state-of-the-art passenger ship owned and operated by the British Cunard Line. Crowds have filled every possible vantage point in New York to witness the end of her maiden voyage. But with the excitement the ship's arrival is generating, Gene fears he's about to lose control of the crowd. Now look, if you don't back up, I'm going to start making arrests. Oh, come on, we just came to watch the ship arrive, then we'll be on our way. I don't care. This is private property. At the mighty blast of a ship's horn, both Gene and the crowd fall silent. And then, Gene is suddenly overwhelmed by the crowd rushing past him. Any chance of controlling them is hopeless. Gene can only turn and follow the others to the water's edge, where the view of the harbor opens up. The sight that greets him stops Gene in his tracks. 300 yards away in the harbor, a gigantic ocean liner glides effortlessly through the water. Dozens of smaller boats surround the Queen Mary to get a closer look, but they seem like toys in comparison. Above her sleek black hull, the white decks are packed with hundreds of waving passengers. And lining the center of the grand ship are 3 huge smokestacks painted bright red. The crowd around Gene erupts into cheers, and Gene finds himself clapping too, overwhelmed by the beauty and power of this ship. He glances to his right and finds himself once again standing next to the balding man from the front of the crowd. The man leans in close so Gene can hear him. "You still gonna arrest us?" Gene only grins. "I'll let you off with a warning this time." Gosh, isn't she magnificent? Can you imagine traveling on a ship like that? Not on a police salary, no. The men fall silent again, watching the Queen Mary sweep by. The liner sounds her horn as she heads toward her mooring on the Hudson River, churning waters glistening in her wake. Gene shakes his head. Maybe it's time I switch careers. A few months after her maiden voyage, the Queen Mary captured the Blue Ribbon, the unofficial title awarded to the fastest ship to cross the Atlantic Ocean. But it wasn't just the Queen Mary's speed that made the liner famous. Her style and elegance won admirers both in Europe and America. And as the Cunard Line's largest and most luxurious ship, the Queen Mary was a floating emblem of the company's success, the latest triumphant addition to a legacy that stretched back almost a century, to an age when steamships were still new technology and the shipping industry was ripe for disruption. From Wondery, I'm Lindsay Graham, and this is Business Movers. Few companies in the history of the United Kingdom have been more entwined with the country's national pride, security, and economic health than the iconic Cunard shipping line. Aboard the firm's timeless and instantly recognizable red, white, and black ships, Cunard has carried mail across the waters, ferried immigrants to new lives, shipped troops to battlefields, and provided first-class travel for actors, authors, kings, and queens. Today, Cunard Line is owned and operated by the Carnival conglomerate, whose annual revenues run well into the billions of dollars. Cunard is now predominantly a luxury cruise service, carrying its international clientele to and from some of the world's most glamorous locations. But Cunard was founded in a very different time. Cunard began in the mid-19th century when a prominent British-Canadian businessman saw a new opportunity in a revolutionary technology, the steam engine. Samuel Cunard believed a new type of ship would replace the dominant sail-powered vessels of the time. While paddle steamers were still equipped with canvas sails, their large wooden hulls were also flanked by giant wheels spun by steam engines, which propelled the ships through the water at unprecedented speeds. By the 1830s, these paddle steamers were already being used to transport supplies up and down the coasts of North America and Great Britain. But a regular, reliable steamship service across the Atlantic was yet to be established. Samuel thought he could be the first one to take advantage of this gap in the market and usher in a new era of transportation. And soon, Samuel was about to disrupt the shipping industry with a technology that some still thought impossibly dangerous. He couldn't have known that the company bearing his name would flourish for more than a century until ship travel itself would be disrupted by an even more impossible-seeming technology, the jet airplane. But long before humanity took to the skies, Samuel was just a man with an idea. To turn his idea into reality, though, he needed steamships. And to build steamships, Samuel needed money. This is the first episode in our 4-part series on Cunard, Full Head of Steam. It's a summer afternoon in 1838 in Boston Harbor, 98 years before the maiden voyage of RMS Queen Mary. 50-year-old Nova Scotia businessman Samuel Cunard steps along the well-worn boardwalk in stride with a shipowner named George. George is showing off his latest acquisition to Samuel, an impressive sailing ship that will provide services up and down the North American and Atlantic coast. But Samuel doesn't really care about George's ship. He's here for another reason, George's money. But to get his hands on it, Samuel first needs to patiently listen to the end of George's monologue. And I couldn't think of any finer name, no more fitting name for such a ship than Aphrodite, the ancient Greek goddess of beauty. Well, she certainly is a beauty, isn't she? Wait till you see the inside. George is about to head up the gangplank when Samuel stops him. George, I must confess something. I've gotten you here under false pretenses. Impressive though the Aphrodite is, I didn't want to meet with you just to see the ship. Oh, business is it? That's right. All righty then, Sam. How can I help you? Well, to put it bluntly, George, I'm here to ask for an investment. I want your help in transforming travel across the Atlantic. I'm inviting you to help me create an ocean railway. I'm afraid, Sam, I believe trains will have a lot of trouble floating. Not at all. They actually already exist. They're called steamships. Oh, I was afraid this is where you were going. Steamships are a fad, Sam, and a dangerous one. I believe they're not. Who would want to trust their cargo, let alone their lives, to a ship with an engine that could explode at any moment in the middle of the ocean? Give me a trusty mainsail and a strong breeze any day. No, I get it, but I've become very familiar with the technology over the past few years. It's developed a lot, and I'm telling you, it's sound. Is that why the Royal William was such a success? Samuel pauses, thrown off by George's remark. The Royal William was a steamship designed to carry mail and cargo from Quebec to Halifax. Samuel invested heavily in it, but the business collapsed. Well, you're right to bring that up, William. I don't blame you. Still, its failures were due to human mismanagement, not the ship's engines. George scoffs, but Samuel isn't ready to give up just yet. Look, George, these ships are fast. They can hit 8 knots or more in all types of weather. No, I'm sorry, Sam. Right now, it takes a month to sail across the Atlantic. There are already a few steamships making the journey in just 16 days. I think I can get that time even lower. Well, that sounds more frightening than exciting. Well, respectfully, George, you are wrong about this. The engines work marvelously, and I'm afraid your sailing ships will be left far behind. George turns away from Samuel, thinking. His eyes rest on his new ship, the Aphrodite. Well, you may be right, Sam, and if you are, I suppose I'll retire a bit less wealthy than I had intended. But I'll spend that retirement sailing at a leisurely pace. There's just something about the old ways. Samuel looks down, disappointed, and George feels a pang of guilt. Would you like to come aboard the Aphrodite still? We can have a glass of wine on deck. It is a fine day. Well, thank you, George, but I just can't. I have several more appointments today. So goodbye, George, and good luck. She really is a lovely ship. Samuel Cunard left the dock in a hurry, late for his next meeting with another potential investor. Samuel was convinced that he was right about steamship technology, but this was not his first rejection. But his quest for investment would soon gain new urgency. Only a few months later, a competition would be announced by the British government to establish a steamship mail service across the Atlantic. A race was about to begin, and Samuel Cunard was determined to win it. In November 1838, the government in London announced that it was seeking bids from steamship companies to run a new mail service between Britain and North America. It was an opportunity that immediately caught Samuel Cunard's eye. Samuel thought it was the perfect chance to kickstart what he called the Ocean Railway. But there was a problem. By the time the announcement of the competition made it to Nova Scotia, it was already January 1839, and the deadlines for submissions to the British government had passed. But Samuel still didn't give up. Immediately, he boarded the next sailing ship bound for Britain. He hoped that his competition in Europe had failed to secure the government contract and that there might still be time for him to win it instead. He was right about the timing, but Samuel did not have any ships or investors yet. To win the competition, Samuel knew he'd have to correct at least one of these shortcomings. So having tried and failed to secure investment in North America, Samuel changed his tactics. Instead of chasing financing first, he decided to place an order with a shipbuilder and then try to use that agreement to secure the contract with the British government. With the ships and a mail service contract in hand, Samuel was sure his luck with investors would then improve. So once Samuel reached England, he didn't head to London to negotiate with the government. Instead, he headed north to the Scottish port of Glasgow, one of the greatest shipbuilding cities in the world. There, he met with a yard owner named Robert Napier. The two quickly agreed on a contract: 4 wooden steamships weighing 960 tons for a price of £32,000 each, roughly $5 million today. With an agreement secured with the shipyard, Samuel next needed to win the all-important mail contract. He hadn't crossed the Atlantic on a whim, though. Samuel had a friend on the inside. Samuel and Sir Edward Parry had become friends 20 years earlier when Sir Edward was stationed in Halifax with the Royal Navy. Now Sir Edward was the admiral in charge of converting the Navy's ships from sail power to steam. But that was not his only responsibility. He was also the man who would decide the winner of the contest. And once he saw Samuel's order for the ships from Glasgow, Sir Edward was happy to award his old friend the sought-after contract. The British government agreed to pay Samuel £55,000 per year, $9 million today, to deliver the mail between the United Kingdom and North America. Samuel now had an order placed with the shipyard and a mailing contract with the government. Now all he needed was the money to actually pay for the ships and get them built. But Samuel was optimistic when he met with potential financiers in London and Liverpool. Surely they would see the strength of his business plan. But to Samuel's surprise, he again received little interest. He needed to move quickly, though. Despite his friendship with Sir Edward, unless Samuel got the project off the ground soon, he knew he could still have the contract taken from him. So yet again, Samuel changed tactics. He thought that his best bet was to go back to Glasgow and seek help from the one man who has as much to gain from this project as Samuel did, the shipbuilder Robert Napier. And seeing that his new ship orders might be in danger, Robert was happy to help. He connected Samuel with men in Glasgow who were already running small fleets of steamers along the British coast. And this time, Samuel's efforts were more successful, securing backing from 2 other wealthy men. But even their combined resources were not enough to finance the ambitious and costly endeavor on their own. Samuel and his new partners still needed more help. But now that Samuel had some investors, he found things easier. Each man that came on board gave confidence to the next investor to also take a chance. And over the next few months, Samuel managed to secure 33 additional investors, raising a total of £300,000. Samuel named this new enterprise the British and North American Royal Mail Steam Packet Company. He was one step closer to finally realizing his dream of creating his ocean railway. And news of Samuel's success traveled quickly, making it back to his hometown of Halifax, Nova Scotia before he did. The locals were delighted. Previously, mail took about a month to travel between Nova Scotia, a British colony, and the mother country. Now the time for letters and packages to reach the United Kingdom would be cut in half. Quicker communications meant tremendous new opportunities for business in North America, and when Samuel finally returned from England in August 1839, the citizens of Halifax celebrated with a dinner in his honor. Samuel, of course, was asked to make a speech, and in Samuel's time, any man of his status was expected to be a great orator. Long, grandiose speeches were par for the course. But Samuel did not enjoy public speaking, so he only spoke briefly at the dinner and modestly gave credit for the new service entirely to the British government. Samuel's mind may have been elsewhere. In just 8 months, he would need to have ships ready to carry mail across the Atlantic by steam, and that was a tall order. Back in Britain, Samuel instructed his shipbuilder, Robert Napier, to prioritize engineering quality over visual appeal. He wanted to ensure his paddle ships would pass through inspection by the Royal Navy. As far as Samuel was concerned, the interiors could be left plain so long as the ships themselves were well built. And as he scrutinized the plans for his new vessels, Samuel focused the bulk of his attention on his flagship, the Britannia. Samuel was fiercely loyal to Britain, and he felt it was only appropriate that his most prized ship pay homage to the country. On February 5, 1840, the Britannia was launched into the Clyde River in Glasgow. By the standards of the day, she was a large ship, 207 feet long and 34 feet wide, but it would be another 5 months before the Britannia was ready for her maiden voyage. Her first port of call was Halifax, Nova Scotia, and then she traveled on down the coast to Boston. In addition to 93 crew members, the Britannia carried 60 passengers on her first crossing, including Samuel Cunard and his daughter Anne. The other 3 steamships Samuel had ordered soon followed the Britannia into the water. The Acadia, Columbia, and Caledonia filled out Samuel's fleet. The speed and reliability of the new service he built saw the number of passengers on each Atlantic crossing steadily increase too. The simple interiors of the new ships didn't seem to put people off either. Even celebrities were among the early passengers. In January 1842, the world-famous author Charles Dickens made his first trip to the United States aboard the Britannia, accompanied by his wife. But while the Britannia's passengers and crew mingled with the rich and famous, the ship's owner was concealing a secret. Many assumed that Samuel was one of the wealthiest men in Nova Scotia. Prior to the founding of his steamship company, that may have been true. Now, though, Samuel was cash poor. Despite the growing popularity of his ocean railway, profits at the new shipping firm were coming up short. Samuel's debtors were ready to collect, and soon his only option to save himself and his company would be to run. It's March 1842 at the dockside in Liverpool, England, 2 years after the maiden voyage of the steamship Britannia, and Samuel Cunard is in trouble. The 54-year-old lies at the bottom of a small rowboat tied up at the dock. The boat belongs to a friend and business associate named Duncan Gibb. As a boatman holds the little vessel steady, Duncan takes a seat next to Samuel. "Mr. Cunard, perhaps this has gone too far. Maybe we ought to face the music. I just need a few moments of your help and then I'll be out of your hair. Is she still at the dock?" Duncan looks across the water to one of Samuel's steamships preparing to depart. Samuel is on the passenger list, but he hasn't boarded yet. He's deeply in debt, and his British creditors have come to the pier to demand payments Samuel can't make. Samuel hopes that once they realize he's not on board, they'll give up the chase, and then Samuel can secretly board the steamer out at sea. But to do that, he needs Duncan and his boat. "Mr. Cunard, if you're so confident that the business can recover, then perhaps you should negotiate. I've tried, but I'm afraid the time for negotiations is over. There are at least 5 men aboard that ship with writs of execution. If they get their hands on me, I'm finished. Nova Scotia is the only place that's safe now. But are you not just delaying the inevitable? If you help me here, Duncan, if I can get aboard that ship, then the business will survive, and the creditors will be paid." "Well, all right." Duncan turns toward his boatman. "Let's get ready." Simultaneously, the Cunard steamer begins to move slowly away from the dock, and Duncan leans down to update Samuel. "All right, she's leaving." "Okay, just wait." Steam spews from the ship's smokestacks as she heads away from dock. "Now, Samuel, if we wait too long, you'll miss your chance. There's only so fast we can row." "Not yet. We need to go. Just a little longer. Samuel, we're going to miss it. Just wait." And right at that moment, several small rowboats emerge from around the far side of the steamer. They're carrying the creditors, who've waited until the very last second to leave the ship and give up their search. Their boats head back toward the shore. "They're leaving, Samuel. They're leaving. All right, go. Now go." The boatman pushes them off, and he and Duncan begin rowing as fast as they can. They gain on the steamer, but it's accelerating as it heads out to sea. It's no use, Samuel. She's too fast for us. Keep going. Just a little longer. We can't row faster than a steamer." But then Duncan notices that the ship is slowing down. "Samuel, it's slowing. What does that mean?" "It means they've received my message." As the rowboat closes in on the steamer, Samuel sits up. A crew member appears on the steamer's deck above and lowers a rope ladder down the side of the hull. Samuel stands on the edge of the rowboat and puts a hand on the ladder. Then he turns back to Duncan. "Well, thank you, Mr. Gibb. I tell you, you've saved my business. Well, the next time I see you, I hope it's under better circumstances. I will make sure of it." By 1842, Samuel Cunard owed over $23 million in modern money. Most of these debts predated his steamship business. A land purchase had gone wrong, and his family had suffered the effects of a wider economic depression. Samuel had hoped the mail contract with the British government would improve his cash flow, but this endeavor had produced lower than expected profits. Now, though, Samuel had bought himself some time. By escaping his English creditors, he had around 2 weeks of tranquility as the steamer made its way across the Atlantic. It was the perfect setting for Samuel to think of a way to dig himself out of the largest financial hole of his lifetime. When Samuel Cunard reached the shores of Nova Scotia, he immediately set to work tackling his debt. His first move was to raise cash by selling off some assets. Samuel sold a tract of land he owned on Prince Edward Island, as well as a farm outside of Quebec. These sales allowed him to make some repayments and keep his head above water, but they only made a small dent in the total of what he owed. Samuel needed much more financial assistance to get back on track. The best way he thought to do that was to refinance the bulk of his debt with a loan from another bank. Luckily, Samuel had established a good relationship with the up-and-coming Bank of Nova Scotia. Samuel had once been an agent of the General Mining Association, one of the bank's most important clients. And when it looked like the GMA might take its banking business elsewhere, Samuel stepped in and convinced the association to continue working with the Bank of Nova Scotia. Samuel figured that the bank managers owed him a favor, and now Samuel was going to call it in. But still, Samuel was asking for a lot. The amount he needed was £45,000, roughly $8 million today, and an enormous sum for an individual at the time. The loan amount was so great that the board of the bank had to hold a special meeting to decide whether or not to grant it. But despite referring to Samuel's state of affairs as embarrassed, the bank ultimately agreed to give Samuel the money. But in order to receive the funds, Samuel had to put up collateral. In response, he pledged virtually everything he owned to the Bank of Nova Scotia, including all the stock in his shipping company and even his home furniture. But that wasn't the only condition that Samuel had to swallow to get his hands on the money. Word of his escape from Liverpool had spread, and it made his new creditors in Nova Scotia anxious. To prevent Samuel running from debt again, the Bank of Nova Scotia made his loan conditional on Samuel not leaving Halifax, leaving the man who had ushered in the era of transatlantic steam travel forbidden to leave the shores of his home country. But Samuel was too relieved to be upset. Now he had the funds to pay off his old creditors, and he could focus entirely on his steamship company. Unable to leave Nova Scotia, Samuel arranged for his son and cousin to travel to and from England, conducting business on his behalf. And luckily, that business was soon booming. 1842's low profits proved to be an outlier. Over the course of the next 5 years, the British and North American Royal Mail Steam Packet Company came to dominate trade on the North Atlantic. The company's growing passenger and mail-carrying services generated reliable profits, and Samuel was able to pay down his remaining debts substantially. And by 1850, Samuel's fleet had grown from 4 steamships to 12. The company's expansion meant it required more of his time and attention, though. And since most of the company's shareholders were located in Liverpool, it became clear to Samuel that he needed to relocate to England. With his debts cleared, though, the Bank of Nova Scotia removed the restrictions on his movement, and Samuel soon officially called London his permanent home. But while Samuel had moved east across the Atlantic, the vast majority of passenger travel was now flowing in the opposite direction. Many poorer Europeans were unhappy, underfed, and underemployed. By contrast, the United States was rapidly expanding westward and needed all the manpower it could get. The result was that over the course of the 1850s, around 3 million immigrants crossed the Atlantic in search of a new life in America, and many of them traveled aboard Samuel Cunard steamships. But Samuel's lucrative business was soon interrupted. In 1854, Great Britain found itself at war. The Russians were battling Turkey for control of the Crimean Peninsula, and Britain and France joined the Turkish side in the conflict. The war was taking place thousands of miles away from the Atlantic Ocean, but the effect on Samuel's fleet would be severe. The contract with the Royal Mail included a special clause that required Samuel to make his ships available to the British government during wartime. Samuel did not complain, though. He was a patriot, and Britain badly needed ships to transport troops and supplies. So 14 of Samuel's steamers, essentially the entire fleet, were devoted to the war effort. Some were outfitted to carry soldiers, others for horses, and one became a dedicated hospital ship. Having his ships conscripted meant that Samuel's steamers had to be withdrawn from transatlantic service, and this could hardly have come at a worse time. Not only was the number of passengers surging, competition had begun to enter the market as well. The Crimean War seemed to present Samuel's rivals with the perfect opportunity to supplant him. But Samuel's decision to support the British war effort proved to have the opposite effect. His sacrifice for the national good won him the admiration and respect of both the British government and its citizens. When the war ended in early 1856 and Samuel's fleet returned to the North Atlantic, British customers rewarded Samuel by flocking back to his ships. His company immediately reclaimed its place as the leader in transatlantic steamship travel, and a new era began for a company that was almost now universally known as the Cunard Line. Some 7 years after the Crimean War, Samuel Cunard retired at the age of 76 and passed control to his son Edward. 2 years later, Samuel died, leaving behind a company that seemed in good health. But just 4 years after his death, Samuel's son Edward Cunard also died unexpectedly at the age of 53. And even while the company was still reeling from this loss, a new competitor entered the waters. The White Star Line began to offer more luxurious, comfortable, and faster transatlantic crossings than Cunard. The emergence of this rival kick-started a furious period of development and innovation in ship design as the two companies competed to build bigger and better ships. Over the decades that followed, Samuel Cunard's humble, mail-carrying wooden paddle steamers were transformed into huge, steel-hulled luxury liners, ships that seemed more like floating hotels than the floating trains Samuel once dreamed of. So by the end of the 1800s, the Cunard Line had grown into one of Britain's most important and prestigious companies. The 20th century then began with a golden age for ocean liners. The average transatlantic crossing time had been cut to under 6 days. Passenger numbers were only rising, and magnificent new ships were taking to the seas. But this new era would take a dark turn. Tragedy, war, and technological revolutions would all threaten transatlantic travel and endanger the future of the company so carefully built by its founder, Samuel Cunard. It's August 1914 at Cunard's central office in Liverpool, England, almost a half-century after the death of the company's founder, Sir Samuel Cunard. 35-year-old Percy Bates, the managing director of the Cunard Line, enters the company's telegraph room. Banks of machinery line the walls and teams of wireless operators hunch over their sets. These men handle communications with all Cunard ships at sea. Percy barks an order. "We need a message out to all westbound ships, gentlemen. Start with Mauritania, please." The door behind him swings open, and Cunard's deputy director, Percy's younger brother Dennis, enters the room. "Hey, just a minute, Percy. What is it? There's no time to waste." Britain has just declared war on Germany, and 20 Cunard ships have been called into military service. Many of those liners are out at sea, however, where they are now vulnerable to attack by the German Navy. Percy needs to get them safely into harbor. "Tell the Mauritania to change course and make a dash for Halifax. She has to get into port as quickly as possible. Tell her to dim lights." "Percy, no, the fog is too thick. I have weather reports. There are already German U-boats out there. Any liner with a British flag is a target. We've got to get our ships to port. But the Mauritania can outrun any U-boat. If every ship out there dims her lights, it'll be chaos. They could smash into each other in the fog. It'd be a worse disaster than Titanic." But Percy isn't deterred. He repeats his commands. "Instruct all our ships to dim their lights. Engines must be run all ahead full. They're to head for the nearest safe port, unload, and return to Britain as quickly as possible." "Percy, no, I'm begging you to pause for just a moment and think this through. You're going to cause chaos out there. Dennis, war is chaos, and hesitation means death. Oh, listen to yourself. You're not an admiral." Percy grabs the door and pulls it open in frustration. "Dennis, please leave." "Oh, come now. Lives depend on us, Dennis. We have to act quickly. You're right, I'm not an admiral, but Britain needs ships, and I have them. And I'm going to get them here as quickly as possible. Now please go." Dennis shakes his head. "Fine, but we had better pray our ship survive this." The telegraph operators share awkward glances over the brothers' argument. Percy gathers himself before turning to the men again. "Right, gentlemen, let's begin with Mauritania." When Percy Bates's message was transmitted across the Atlantic, the busy sea routes became even more chaotic than Dennis had feared. Blacked-out liners raced past each other in the fog. Miraculously, there were no collisions, and all of Cunard's ships made it safely to port. But Percy was not merely the director of a transatlantic steamship company anymore. He and the Cunard Line were now part of the greatest conflict the world had yet seen. Back in the 1850s, Samuel Cunard had lent his ships to the British government during the Crimean War. In the decades afterwards, the company received considerable support from the British Treasury. But that meant when fighting broke out in 1914, Percy Bates was also obligated to make Cunard ships available to the military again. But World War I would prove a far longer and bloodier conflict than the Crimean War. Over the next 4 years, the Cunard fleet sailed 3.5 million miles around the world, carried 9 million tons of supplies, and transported 900,000 troops. But that service came at a cost. 20 of the company's 25 ships were lost in combat. So when the war finally ended in 1918, a major rebuilding program was needed. Percy ordered the construction of 11 new ships, and the company's fleet was augmented by an enormous ocean liner confiscated from the defeated Germans. These new ships and a post-war economic boom reinvigorated the Cunard Line. So by 1926, its fleet was larger than it had been before the war. But competition on the North Atlantic was also fiercer than ever. The Germans had built new, fast liners. The Italian and French had plans to outdo them. And British pride demanded that Cunard now match that ambition. So in the late 1920s, plans were made for an 80,000-ton superliner, the grandest and most elegant ship the world had ever seen. Construction began in Glasgow in 1930. The ship was codenamed Hull 534. But then, events out of Percy's control derailed all his plans. The Great Depression devastated the world economy, and the shipping industry was not spared. Passenger numbers plunged, taking Cunard's revenues with them. And as the company slipped into the red, Percy made the difficult decision to suspend construction on Hull 534. Still, it wasn't enough. As the Depression continued to grind on, both Cunard and its old British rival, the White Star Line, were soon on the brink of collapse. With the shipyards of Glasgow silent and Cunard's superliner still unfinished, the future of the entire British shipping industry looked grim. That's when the government stepped in. Hoping to bolster the fragile national economy, politicians made Cunard an offer. The British state would loan the company £3 million to complete Hull 534, as well as an additional £5 million to construct an even bigger sister ship. In total, the bailout was almost the equivalent of $750 million today. Cunard had a lifeline, but once again, the help came with strings attached. The British government's assistance came with one condition: Cunard and White Star had to merge. Percy did not like the idea of joining forces with Cunard's bitter rivals, but he swallowed his pride as it was his only option. The new company was named Cunard White Star, with Cunard, the larger company, owning 2/3 of the operation. With the merger complete, the British government released the money and construction at the Glasgow shipping yard resumed. Finally, on May 27, 1936, the completed Hull 534, now named RMS Queen Mary, made her maiden voyage from Southampton, England to New York City. Many at the time called Queen Mary the grandest ocean liner ever built. Her black hull was over 1,000 feet long, and the top of her 3 iconic red smokestacks towered 180 feet above the sea. Her interiors were a testament to 1930s Art Deco design. Geometric patterns, bold lines, intricate wood paneling, and elegant furniture, all helping to create spaces that were both grand and inviting. Plus, RMS Queen Mary didn't just look good, she was immensely powerful. Cunard's new ocean liner could heave through the waves at speeds of more than 30 knots. That's about 35 miles per hour, almost 4 times as fast as the paddle steamers of Samuel Cunard's day. And then the Queen Mary was followed into the water only a few years later by her sister ship, the even larger Queen Elizabeth. And these 2 ships were intended to usher in a new business model for Cunard. The days of mass immigration to America were over, but companies like Cunard realized that income stream could be replaced by a new type of traveler, the middle-class tourist. As economies finally emerged from the Great Depression, there were growing numbers of would-be passengers with the money and desire to see more of the world. And of course, as they were tourists, these passengers were not heading to their destinations permanently. They needed to book a ticket home as well. Cunard now had the opportunity to charge them twice. But the new Queen Elizabeth's first passengers would not be tourists. They would be soldiers. World War II called both the Queen Mary and Queen Elizabeth into military service as troop ships. But this time, Cunard's grand liners would survive the fighting, and both queens were able to return to service following the end of the war in 1945. Percy Bates died the following year, having successfully guided his company through not 1, but 2 world wars. And the prosperous decade that followed saw a new golden age for ocean liners on the North Atlantic. But in the late 1950s, Cunard would face a threat bigger than competition, war, or economic depression. A century earlier, Cunard had used steam engines to disrupt the shipping industry and render sailboats obsolete. Now it seemed another leap in technology was about to turn Cunard's grand ocean liners into relics of the past. It would fall to one man to save Cunard from sinking. But the mild-mannered accountant on a rescue mission would not come from within the company. Instead, he would come from the very industry that looked set to unravel Cunard's business model and destroy its hopes of prosperity, the airlines. From Wondery, this is episode 1 of Steering Cunard Off the Rocks for Business Movers. In the next episode, British airline accountant Basil Smallpiece becomes Cunard's newest chairman and is charged with saving the firm from collapse. If you'd like to learn more about Basil Smallpiece and Cunard, we recommend Of Comets and Queens by Basil Smallpiece, The Only Way to Cross by John Maxton Graham, and Transatlantic by Stephen Fox. A quick note about our dramatizations. In most cases, we can't know everything that happened, but all our reenactments are based on historical research. Business Movers is hosted, edited, and executive produced by me, Lindsay Graham, for Airship. Audio editing by Mohammed Shazib. Sound design by Molly Bach. Music by Lindsay Graham. Additional writing for this episode by Cody Hoffman. Associate producer Jake Sampson. Executive producers are William Simpson for Airship and Aaron O'Flaherty, Jenny Lauer-Beckman, and Marshall Louie for Wondery.